Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar today. Let me press the button to show my screen here. This is Glenn Kendall with Concourse Hosting. Thanks so much for joining me today. Going to be talking about making a jitter plot for doing gift officer comparisons. A little about GoToWebinar. There's a big control panel there on the side. Go ahead and there's a section, it's broken down into different pieces. There's a section called questions that you can click on the little box with the arrow and pop that out, and then hit the red arrow at the top of the GoToWebinar control panel to collapse it all back down again. That way you can see everything that's going on and be able to interact and ask questions as we go. This is going to be an interactive presentation, so I am going to be watching for questions and answering your questions as we go. So, feel free to ask questions and participate. So pretty straightforward as far as the tools go. Sometimes I get a little crazy doing some different things, but today it's going to be very straightforward. Tableau desktop, I'm using 10.5. Connecting to Tableau server, which will have a custom Tableau data source in it. So just a little about us and what we do. This is the sales portion of the webinar. So Concourse, we host Blackbaud software, and we also host data warehouses, again, focusing on Blackbaud software. So BBCRM, Razor's Edge, Financial Edge, BBIS, NetCommunity, that sort of stuff. And of course, we also host Tableau server and build custom data sources and do consulting. So if you have any of those needs, come talk to me later. So the main focus today of the webinar is really talking about, we're talking about gift officers, but it doesn't have to be gift officers. It's really doing a visualization where you're comparing individual performance versus that of a group. And when you're building visualizations, one common thing that you'll run into is that people might not care about what it is that you're making, right? But if you make it about them, where they're able to compare themselves, and they actually will appear in a drop-down list, and they can pick themselves and see how they're doing, versus somebody else, one of their peers, them versus the average, them versus their own personal goals, whatever. People like to compare themselves versus whatever. So if you incorporate that and think about that when you're making visualizations, at least, have some that it's all about your target audience, right? So it's not just a bunch of numbers, average, gift officer, performance, whatever. If you have individual, comparisons in there, then people will suddenly love it and be excited about it. Why a jitter plot? So does anyone know what a jitter plot is? What I mean by jitter plot? Go ahead and type in the questions there, what you think a jitter plot is. I'll give you a couple minutes to type something in there. One person says no idea. That's a good answer. That's a good, honest answer. Probably heard of scatter plot. So you might think maybe it's similar to a scatter plot. Everyone else is too shy to type anything in, apparently. All right, so we'll talk about what a jitter plot is, because, it's not a normal thing you run into. I happened to find it in a book that I was looking at about dashboards, and that's how I learned about what a jitter plot is. So, but there's, more than one way that you can compare things, individual with all the others. The most common one that we see is a pie chart. Please don't use pie charts. They're not only ugly, they actually don't provide an accurate way to be able to compare one person versus another. Like the human eye can't tell by looking at a pie chart those slices, especially when you get to be like more than 4 slices. And we'll also talk about some of the other ways besides Jitterplot you could do overlapping dots, box, and whisker. If you're not sure, use a bar chart. A bar chart is always a nice, way to do a comparison. All right. So just to get a sense of the audience here, if you don't mind, you shy people, please go ahead and, introduce yourself into the questions by way of just saying, how much experience you have as far as Tableau goes. You're brand new, you have a few months experience, you have a year experience, you're a pro, whatever. So most people are new. Yay, that's awesome. So I'm excited for your Tableau. You're starting your Tableau journey. That's awesome. Yeah, stick with it. That's my advice. It's going to take a little while maybe to, get oriented and figure things out, but keep sticking with it. All right. Thank you for your answers there. I'm going to do what I told you all to do, move my stuff out of the way, and let's get cranking here in Tableau. End of slideshow. All right. Okay, so I'm using Tableau Desktop Professional Edition. I'm connected up here to Tableau server, so I'm already signed in to our Tableau server site. And I'm just connected to the sample database. Basically, it's the same sample database that's in Razor's Edge that we've made some data sources out of. So conceptually here, don't worry too much about the data itself. It's just, the concepts that we're working on. All right, so I'm going to click on Connect to a Data Source. These are my published data sources on Tableau Server. I'm going to go ahead and click on Actions. And then once I do that, I have some data. Now I can click on Sheet. So this is our Actions data source. So this is similar to, Razor's Edge query as far as similar fields that you would have available within Razor's Edge query in order to track actions. So in this case, we're interested in tracking actions of a solicitor and comparing, say, just like the number of actions that solicitors have. Again, it's just sample data. So, but just to get a sense of what our data looks like, I'm just going to just double click on the solicitor name. So these are all the names that are in the data source. And then I'll do a count here of the number of records. And so we see we, have some crummy data in here. There's null for the solicitor name for a bunch of actions. So I'm going to go ahead and just right click and say exclude just to remove those. And so this is just to get a sense of, what my data looks like in here. So who I'm comparing, these are my solicitors and my gift officers, and then this is the number of actions that they have. So up here in Tableau, if you click on this Show Me in the upper right, this is kind of a quick way to jump into some different kind of, canned visualizations to start with. Just kind of populates the marks card and moves things around. So here's the pie chart I was talking about. And this is why you don't want to use a pie chart, right? So this is terrible for comparison purposes. Like I can see that Allison here has the most, and it's more than half of the total. But then when I try to get down and look at some of these others, it's really ugly and messy, and don't use pie charts. They're terrible. So another way you can do a comparison is this box and whisker chart. This is more of kind of a scientific thing. I think for you would see this if you do scientific journals and comparisons of scientific data. So here's Allison way at the top there, and then kind of here's everyone else. And this is something that's built into Tableau, is to put these sort of bars and this box in here, they call it, which is basically, it defines like quartiles as far as, okay, here's the average, and are you within this quartile and that sort of thing. But it's also, kind of confusing to look at a box and whisker plot. So as tempted as you might be to use that, unless you have a very technical audience, I would say stay away from that. Which brings us to our friend, the bar chart. So this is always a good fallback to do a bar chart. You can sort by, say, the number of records if you want to, or do that by descending. And so you can tell, this is why it's so much better to use a bar chart than a pie chart. I can tell down here, which ones are about the same size as the others, and get a really good comparison of things. So when in doubt, you can go ahead and use a bar chart for something. But now let's talk about a jitter plot and what that looks like. Somebody asked the question, can you do a custom sort, say by last name? Sure, so you can sort up here, and we can sort alphabetically, or like you said, I can sort on a field. So when you sort on a field here, you just have to have, so in this case, I'm sorting on the name. The name itself is like first name, last name aggregated together. If you happen to have last name, I do have solicitor last name here. Basically, I think you'd have to put another, we'd have to add last name as a detail into the viz so that we could sort by it. But yeah, you can sort by different things, or you can just manually set the sort as well. Okay. So Jitterplot kind of starts with this question, which is, if we're going to look at like dots and have each person be a dot, so this is the total number of records for all actions, how can we look at a chart where people are separated by dots rather than on a bar chart? So this is basically all people and all actions kind of crammed together there into one. If I take the solicitor name over here in the tooltip, it doesn't show up over here because this is all solicitor names are represented by all of those actions. This is a sum total of all the actions. Then if I take the records ID, so each person has their own individual ID, and put it on there, then I can start to get a breakdown. So I can see here's Allison, she's up here at the top, and then here's everyone else in these different dots down below. So this is just, they call this an overlapping dot chart. So this is also by itself terrible because, right, you can't tell what's going on down here. All of these dots are overlapping. So wouldn't it be nice if there was some way to spread these out? And that's what a jitter plot is. So in order to do that, what we're going to do is make a calculated field. So this is the trick here. I'm going to make a calculated field, and I'm going to call it x-axis. And it's just going to be this function called index. Everyone got that? All right. Now I'm going to take this and drag it up here to my columns, and nothing has happened yet. They're all just here in the middle instead. But what I can do is I can say compute using, and basically this, it's a table calculation that is set up just across the table by default, but if I say do it across specific dimensions, like the solicitor records ID, then what it does is it basically spreads out all of those dots across the axis, right? The x-axis there. And so this is what the index does, is it basically just numbers them as they appear in the sheet. So, you know, Allison's number 1, and then it just numbers them 2, 3, 4, 5, and it just spreads them across like that. So now there's all my gift officers spread across. Now in this particular case, I've got Allison, she's way up here and everyone else is down there. So when you have a situation like that where your data is spread far apart across the axis that you're calculating things on, what you can do is you can edit the axis and you can make the scale logarithmic. So instead of this being equal spacing, it kind of, you know, it increases logarithmically as you go up. So that kind of brings things closer together. So that's just a little trick that you can do to help with that. Does that make sense, what we've done so far here? So this in and of itself is a jitter plot. Now some interesting things that we want to do is we want to do a comparison, right? So we want to say, okay, if I want to look at one of these individuals, how can I get that one dot to sort of show up prominently for that one person versus everyone else? So the first thing I'm going to do is create a parameter. So parameter is something that is user input. The user can choose what they want to put in there. I'm going to call this one name list. It's going to be a string. And really what it's going to be is basically my list of solicitors, right? So I'm just going to pre-populate it with all of the solicitors in my list right now. And I'm going to go ahead and show this over here on the right. So maybe move your control panel further down or something so you can see this. So there's my name list. So it's not doing anything so far, but just know that it's, you know, I'm able to select everybody from this list here. Okay. So now the next step is, how do I make it so that if I highlight somebody from the list, say Robert Hernandez, how do I get it so Robert Hernandez's data shows up wherever the heck he is? There he is. So his data is highlighted over everyone else's. I'm going to make another calculated field to do that. I'm going to call this one color. We'll do the British spelling of color today because why not? We'll say if the solicitor name so solicitor name is the name from my data equals name list. So basically if those two values are the same, then nothing. It's basically just kind of a placeholder, and you'll see why in a minute. So it's either going to be null or just, you know, that little nothing value there. So here's my color. I'm going to drag this down over here. And now we can see that Robert Hernandez being selected from the list. When he selected, his dot is now a different color. Select Allison Andrews, then her dot becomes a different color. David Murphy, his dot becomes a different color. There's one problem here. The dot moves, right? So when I'm selecting that person, the dot is jumping to the number 1 position, so we'll need to figure out how to fix that. But we're at least able to get the color to change. And I can customize these colors, so I can click over here and edit the colors and say, basically if it's null, so there isn't a match, that's one color. And then if there is a match, it's a different color. I kind of like these colors, actually. I can also, in the colors, pick a border if I want, like say a black border around the circle. The other thing I can do is do the same thing with the size. So I'm going to take the existing color calculated field and drag it up to size. Now, when I do that, I'm holding down the control button. If I were to just drag it up, then it would move. So if I just take color and just drag it to size, I'm moving it from color to size. I'm hitting the back arrow up here. This is undo. So if you do something you don't like in Tableau, you just hit this button and you can undo it. If you hold down the control button, it makes a copy of it and drags it up there. So now the same thing here that I did with the color, I can do with the sizes. So I can say, what do I want the size difference to be between the selected one and the not selected one? So I can play around with these and come up with a size that I want. So now both the size and the color are changing as I'm jumping around and selecting different things. Okay. Any questions so far? Does anyone have any idea how I can get it so this doesn't jump back to the number 1 position every time? So it really comes back to this x-axis. So before, we were computing the x-axis across the solicitor records and only the solicitor records. But now we introduced this other element of color into it. So it's doing these independently. And so that's why color is always jumping back to the beginning. But if I do my table calculation across both, the ID and the color, then it's going to take both into account. And so now when I select from my list, the position stays the same, and all that's happening is that I'm highlighting the person in question instead. I can maybe sexy up the tooltip a bit. So when you mouse over it, let's maybe put that in the middle, make it bigger, make this a different color, maybe bolden the name, put parens around the number of records. That way when you mouse over it, you can see the name of the person and how many actions they have. I can also label everything on the graph as well if I'd like. I can drag down, again, holding control, dragging this pill down to label. Now I have a label of that showing up on each one. And I can control the alignment of the label. I can make it within the bubble, on top of the bubble, under the bubble, to the side of the bubble. Or no label at all. Okay. Now what I can do is make a dashboard of this. I'm going to go back here and rename this, just call it actions. We can clean this up a little bit, maybe get rid of the x-axis because it doesn't actually serve a purpose. Instead of number of records, we can call this maybe total actions. So to do that, I right-click on the axis here and then say Edit Axis, and I'm able to change the what the text says on there. Can also get rid of the grid lines if I don't want those grid lines. I can go under Format, and then under Lines, I can say no grid lines for the sheet. Over here on my dashboard, I can create a dashboard just by, clicking on the dashboard, and if I double click on actions, it adds that worksheet over here. I can get rid of these elements because I don't care to have them listed there. And then maybe add just a text box up at the top, something that says gift officer comparison. Format this, maybe make it a little bigger, bold, and I can collapse this down and maybe move this so it's next to that. Maybe collapse this down a little bit. And then I can format, maybe format the title here instead of saying name list, say something like highlight a gift officer. Because you want to give instructions to your user, right? What they're expected to do with this. Whatever. Maybe add an extra space in there if possible. Too much space. You can also edit or format rather the parameters themselves, so you can make these bigger so that when people select it, it's easier to see from the drop-down list. Make this a lot bigger, maybe. Yeah, just something like that. Oh, we lost our tooltip. There we go. So that's a jitter plot. Does anyone have any questions? That's really the main thing that I wanted to share with you guys today, is to show you how to create those dots, be able to spread them across the axis like that, again, by using this calculated field, the x-axis. that adds this index parameter. And then once we throw it up here on the chart, again, editing the table calculation and having the calculation go across both the records ID and the color. And then, yeah, really the second element was this color concept where we're taking the solicitor name, and if it matches the name that we've selected in the list, then it's a blank value, but then we are able to, specify the behavior of that blank value versus no selection at all. So it's either one or the other, null or a blank value. A couple questions here. Somebody said, can you get the chart title to change based on the selections that are made? Say like you have a dashboard of 4 more measures, and the selection would be for the development officer and the date range. So I think what you mean is up here. So what you can do is you can insert different values that are associated with the sheet in there. So I think that's what you mean. Someone asked the question, can you add another filter to show what type of action was taken, phone visit, etc.? Yes, absolutely you can. So I didn't in this case because the sample data is so sparse, but under your action information here, again, just kind of, I like to just see what the data is first before I throw filters in. So we'll go by name, and then the type, the action type. Let's actually put the action type first here. Go away nulls. And then sort by the number of records descending. All right, so we see letter. The letter type is 147 in the sample database. Brochure is next. Phone call is next. So yeah, I mean, you could always throw type up here and actually let the user select which ones, or just have a subset of these that are available for people to choose from. Or better yet, you can actually make side-by-side charts. So this could be, you're just tracking one type. You say this is just the letter type, and that's it. And then we would make another. You can right-click on the worksheet and say duplicate. And so then we can have it do exactly the same thing, but then change the filter and say, this is a filter for, I don't know, meetings. So then in your dashboard, you could have, these side by sides. You could have one, this is, letter actions, meetings actions, email actions, whatever, that kind of stuff. Okay. Looks like we got another question here. I'm going to answer this question. I'm going to go ahead and end the recording. I will stick around and answer more questions afterwards. But Amy has a question. What chart would you recommend to use for displaying solicitor actions versus the gifts they bring in if a donor increases giving after solicitor's touch point? I mean, that's a little more complicated because there's not a direct correlation between those two things. We talked about that a little bit on the previous webinar. I am going to be doing a webinar that kind of relates to that for APRA, in June where we're going to be talking about gamifying moves management. So basically, it's a way to, it's kind of tracking those different things, but yeah, I mean, you have to come up with a criteria by which you're tracking those things, because they're different measurements, right? You're measuring actions. That's one thing that you're measuring, and then there's the proposals and the total amounts associated with the proposals. So somebody has to make a decision to say, hey, what does this mean, and how do those things correlate? So I know that's not an answer, but I think maybe really it's kind of two charts, and you maybe let people look at that comparison themselves, or find fun ways to, try to relate those two. And that's what we're going to talk about in the gamification webinar. So, all right. Thank you so much for joining me today, everyone. This webinar was recorded, so I am going to be posting it to YouTube in the next day or two. And so you can watch it again there, or send a link to somebody. And yeah, like I said, I'll stick around and answer more questions. So.